Hey everyone, we're here at Korg with the Volca Modular, which is a modular synth in the Volca line. And it's unique in the Volca line in that you can use patch cables to adjust the signal path by patching different modules within the Volca Modular's signal path together. So the first module in the signal path of Volca Modular is the source module, and that includes two triangle core VCOs, or voltage controlled oscillators, one of which is hardwired to modulate the frequency of the other one. And that's a process known as FM, or frequency modulation, but it's a little different from FM in a digital synth context, such as, say, on the Volca FM, because these are both analog oscillators, one of which, the oscillator that you hear, is called the carrier because it carries modulation from the other oscillator, which is known as the modulator, which is doing the frequency modulation. So a couple of the controls that you find on the source module of Volca Modular are the mod knob, which controls the degree to which the modulator oscillator modulates the carrier oscillator. If I turn that up, it sounds like this. And the frequency of the modulator oscillator is controlled by the ratio knob. When the ratio knob is turned all the way down, the frequency of the modulator oscillator is 1/4 of the frequency of the carrier oscillator, which works out to 2 octaves below. But if I turn that up, you have different ratios of modulator frequency to carrier frequency. So you can hear that if I turn the modulation up and then adjust the ratio knob. And I'm just doing that by hand, but I encourage you to try some modulation from some of the functions into the ratio or the mod modulation inputs. So next in the signal path of Volca Modular are the functions, and those are used to control things like the low pass gates or to send modulation information pretty much anywhere on Volca Modular. And hardwired is function 1 to the first low pass gate, and that functions as kind of a basic envelope style function. I have a release knob which controls the amount of decay after I release a note, and then I have an attack knob which controls the speed at which the note rises to meet maximum amplitude. And these functions have a couple of different inputs on the top here where you can trigger them using gate and trigger inputs, or you can modulate the attack, release, the shape, and the time in the case of function number 2. And then on the bottom are the modulation outputs, as well as the end of cycle triggers. So when you fire off a function, as soon as it finishes, it sends an end of cycle trigger to the end of cycle trigger output, and that can be used to trigger something else on Volca Modular. The modulation outputs are both positive and negative, and out of the positive modulation output you get a positive contour, and out of the negative modulation output, you guessed it, a negative contour. So an example of using a function to modulate something on the source module of Volca Modular, we're going to loop function number 2 by patching the end of cycle trigger output to the beginning of cycle trigger input, and then we're going to patch the positive modulation output of function number 2 into the pitch of oscillator number 1. So that's an example of using a function to send modulation information, in this case to the ratio of frequencies between the modulator and the carrier oscillators. So moving on through the signal path of Volca Modulator, you get to the low pass gates. And we already talked about those a little bit and why they differ from a traditional filter on an East Coast synth, but why are there two? Well, on Volca Modular, both low pass gates are hard patched to go to the output and mixed before they reach the space out, which we'll talk about in a moment. The low pass gates can be modulated through the middle modulation input, and they can take any audio input from anywhere on Volca Modular. So to use both low pass gates to hear both oscillators instead of having one oscillator modulating the other, instead use them as a kind of double VCO setup, I'm going to patch the output of the modulator oscillator into the input of low-pass gate number 2. And then I'm going to take the modulation output of function number 2, which is already hard patched to modulate the first low-pass gate, and I'm going to patch those together into the input, modulation input of low-pass gate 2. So if I turn that up, I'm going to hear both oscillators coming out of the output because both low-pass gates are getting mixed together before they hit the space out. Once again, we have the ratio control, so I can go 1 to 1 and have them both on the same frequency. So now we have a 2 VCO synth, and if I turn the cutoff of the second low-pass gate all the way up, we have basically 2 identical oscillators running in unison. And we can do some fun stuff with tuning. And after the low-pass gates in the signal path, before we get to the audio out of Volca Modular, we have what's known as the space out. And this is a spatial modeled reverb that adds a little bit of space and depth to your sound. And that's kind of a hallmark of West Coast synthesis as well, because early West Coast synths incorporated spring reverbs, and later West Coast synths incorporated DSP-based effects that were even as far as going quadraphonic, which I think is really, really cool. In this case, the space out is actually modulatable. So what we're going to do is loop the second function on Volca Modular, and we're going to send the modulation output of function 2 into the modulation input of the space out. And so that's going to give us a modulated spatial reverb. I'm going to turn the bass value of that up a little bit. In the next video, we'll talk about all of the good stuff on Volca Modular, the utilities that let you do cool things with the signal path that we just talked about. If you like this video, or you have a question, or you want to tell us about something cool that you made on your Volca Modular, let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to the Korg channel. Thanks for watching.